So I think we didn't want people thinking we were taking a long or extended summer vacation, but a good reason for not doing it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Okay, let's move to item number 3. We have approval of minutes. Any changes, errors, or omissions anyone wants to bring to the table?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the next item is discussion of impacts of the proposed Sebastian annexation MPO priorities. This is the primary purpose of this special meeting, in that it's out of the normal cycle. At the last MPO meeting, there was a discussion about the city of Sebastian's proposed annexation. I understand that there was a first reading, but that there needs to be a second reading after this meeting. So there was some questions and information concerns just raised about that potential annexation and impacts it may have on the highway transportation plan for the county. So that's the purpose of the meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Phil.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'm just going to throw a few graphics up here to give you guys some perspective and a little background on the purpose of this meeting and why we're here and what the specific issues are. And to begin with, the location of the proposed Sebastian annexation, it's bounded to the north by County Road 510, south 69th Street, east 74th Avenue for about 2/3 of its length, and to the west 82nd Avenue. And this is a significant locational issue because two of these are very, very high MPO priorities. We've been talking about these for a very long time, County Road 510 and the 82nd Avenue project, up to and including extensions to Laconia Street. In terms of the annexation area, we're looking at 1,118 acres, and this is from the first reading of the Sebastian annexation package. This is what the proposed land use changes look like in the abstract, and there are a number of concerns that prompted this meeting. Most important, transportation issues, but we take a look also at some comprehensive plan consistency, utility, and other considerations. And specifically among transportation issues, the MPO members raised some concern about the timing of the proposed annexation and potential impact of the annexation on County Road 510 and 82nd Avenue projects. They are respectively priority number 1 out of 8 and number 5 out of 8 on our last priority projects report. Right-of-way will need to be acquired, and 82nd Avenue is actually in eminent domain, and they've actually accepted DOT's deposit for the parcels as of last Friday. So here are some maps showing what the potential site plan and future land use may look like. And if we take a look at the western perimeter along 82nd Avenue, we see a conceptual site plan consisting of commercial, industrial, and I'll certainly let the City of Sebastian explain this in more detail than I can. But this is the proximity of the 82nd Avenue project in general terms relative to the site plan. Other transportation concerns, cost estimates for the priorities. They're currently very expensive priorities, and because we only get a small amount of money in the DOT work program for non-state roads every year, there are concerns about keeping the cost and what the cost impact will be on the projects. So on County Road 510, the segment just from 58th to 82nd has an ultimate cost estimate of $50 million. And 82nd Avenue, 69th to 510, $21 million. That's the construction cost. So other aspects of the project, the Exhibit B in the annexation packet maintains connectivity to adjacent county roads. This is a pretty important county principle. We'd like to have roads at half-mile intervals without an interrupted grid. I think you all know the value of having roads that operate on a highly functioning grid and subgrid. You take a look at our South County area, 4th, 8th, 12th, 16th, nice clean half-mile intervals. That spreads the load on traffic, so no one area takes on too much traffic. The Laconia Street extension is something that came out of, I believe, our 2025 long-range plan, and currently in Sebastian, if you live in the South Highlands, it's a very circuitous route to kind of get out of the South Highlands. You can take Barber Street, which is a very busy road. You can travel north up to County Road 512, which is not shown on this graphic, and curl around on County Road 510 and exit that way. they're really very limited direct exits, so this is where the Laconia Street 82nd Avenue project would line up. Comprehensive plan consistency, and we have people from our Community Development Department, Roland Du Bois, County Administrator Jason Brown, other people in the county here. Basically, what we look for is we have new town ordinances in the county, consistency with what the new town ordinances from the county would say, and utilities, and we have members of the Indian River County Utilities Department here as well, and where the utilities will come from. So this is pretty much our concerns articulated in order, and any other concerns. This is sort of an open discussion. This is what the property looks like today, and at that I'm going to kind of cut my speech short to everyone's relief, and kind of turn this over to some of the local jurisdictional representatives who are involved.
All right, let me start.
Okay.
How's that? Okay, I just want to kind of clarify some of the situation. The MPO has a responsibility for the transportation infrastructure within the county, and they have the responsibility for making sure that operates correctly. This meeting is an MPO meeting dealing with transportation infrastructure. It is not a meeting dealing with whether Sebastian should or should not annex his property. That is not under the control of the MPO, and quite frankly, it raises sunshine issues between myself and Councilmember Bogdan Partland if people try to engage us in that conversation. So this meeting is not aimed at discussing whether Sebastian should or should not annex that property. Okay? The MPO has no authority over any of the other issues that are related to that, and once again, we're stepping across the boundary between two City of Sebastian council members being a member of this committee and possibly getting involved in sunshine issues. So even though I know we'll talk about things other than transportation infrastructure today, there will be points in time in which I think Bob or I, either one, is going to have to say we can't deal with that because of that issue, that potential issue. Okay. I think it's understandable that the right-of-way issue is something of concern. I think it was expressed in that meeting. And so at the July 10 meeting of the MPO, when it was brought up, we agreed that this meeting needed to take place and talk about the transportation infrastructure. At the same time, at the July 10 meeting for the Sebastian City Council, the council agreed and asked our Planning and Zoning Commission to table the consideration of the potential land use categorizations, and that was done, so it wasn't discussed prior to this meeting taking place. That was as much a good faith effort as it was anything else, just to make sure that we stop the process in the interim. I kind of like, you've covered, I'm going to go through several topics and then we can kind of go from there because I want to lay out the position very quickly, okay? You did cover the information about the eminent domain on the 82nd Avenue. That's been filed. It is a litigation. For Sebastian to get involved in that right now is potentially an issue based on our city attorney because it is in litigation. The 510 right-of-way has not been finalized, and the FDOT has not, as far as we know, hasn't done anything with the 510 right-of-way, hasn't asked for that. But let's talk about how we got here. I've done quite a bit of investigation in Sebastian on this. There were discussions between FDOT and the Grace representatives that centered on the location of the ponds more than anything else. As we were told by the Grace representatives in a meeting last week, a phone conversation meeting last week, it's not the valuation that's the issue, it's the location of the ponds, basically. So there was discussion about the location of the ponds. On May the 29th, the county public works staff and the Grace representatives met and discussed about alternatives to the location of the ponds that FDOT had laid out. There were three alternatives that were talked about. On June 15th, the public works director sent an email to the Grace property owners and indicated that they didn't support the underdam system or the roadside swale system, two of the three alternatives. But he indicated they do not object if the ponds are relocated or designed in a more aesthetic pleasing configuration. And that was actually a quote from the email. We do not object if they're relocated or in a more aesthetic pleasing configuration. Gray's Brothers Group went back to FDOT and proposed a shared pond concept where they build ponds within the Gray's Brothers property and they be shared with the FDOT for rainwater capturing off the roadway as well as in the project, and that was tentatively, as far as we know, agreed to. FDOT, since they're turning this property over to the county when they complete the construction, asked Graves to get an interlocal type agreement with the county, indicating that the county agreed that they would basically accept the property. Graves contacted the county and was told by Bill DeBarrel, the city attorney's office, that they would not support that because it was considered for annexation in the city of Sebastian. So much for cooperation. All right? So, and once again, I'm going to say, the property owner told us by phone, I have people here that were in the meeting, that it's not the dollars, it's the issue of the pond, location of the ponds. They worked out a process to relocate the ponds, and they were told it wouldn't be supported by the county because they were going to annex the property into the city. There was discussions about annexing the property into the city. And so that's basically where we stand right now on the process. The reason that there hasn't been an agreement made on the right-of-way, which is under the guise of the FDOT, is because the county attorney staff told the Graves brothers and the FDOT that they would not do that. So that's the information that we have to date on it. So.
Jason, our
A few of those things are consistent with what other people have been told. I'll start with the idea, first of all, your idea of sunshine is certainly different than mine, and I've been involved in this for a long time. This is a properly noticed meeting.
Yes, it is.
And it says right here that it's proposed, Sebastian, annexation, and the MPO would include things, not just roads, but land use and things like that. So I can't imagine almost anything. Let me finish.
We'll listen to anything anybody wants to say. It's just trying to get us to commit one way or the other.
No, nobody's asking you to commit.
Yeah.
We're talking about the way you, again, the way you discussed it. It was like you couldn't have any real discussion about it. Okay, I just want to make it clear that we can have discussion. The idea of ponds, it was only half the story, because Graves' brother Cole talked to me, and he talked to me about the ponds, and I immediately said I'd have a conversation with our county administrator, which I did, and I believe we have had other conversations with Graves' brothers since that time. So I just want to be clear on that. I do have a question on the annexation, the idea of the value is now is just the ponds and not the land itself, because I've heard two inconsistent things. One is that the land's being valued based on it being ag land, but the second thing is, that I've heard, is that what we have now is land that has been, we've paid for the land, or the FDOT has paid for the land, or put in escrow, whatever, an amount that the land would cost based on it being ag land. But the eminent domain process, the people for the Graves brothers may argue that there's a pending annexation which might value the land at commercial industrial, so it may have to be valued on that basis.
Have they placed that argument forward?
No, I didn't say they had. I'm just bringing out what I've heard, for goodness sakes. I mean, you said all the things that you heard were good, clear facts. I'm trying to articulate a whole number side of things that we've heard recently, and these things I've just heard recently, which is why the conversation is so necessary. If I'd heard some of these things 3 months ago, I would have been more engaged 3 months ago. So again, there's a lot of things that you articulated as being settled, which I don't believe have even been discussed outside of the city of Sebastian, which I believe this is the first part of the discussion. And as someone who represents the entire county, I think this discussion is warranted and called for. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, other members of the MPO?
One thing to add to that, just to kind of put it in perspective, the county had bought a number of businesses at the intersection of 43rd Avenue and State Road 60. We are still paying true-up costs and other costs related to that right-of-way acquisition some 15 years later, probably. So what's agreed upon today to what's paid out over 5 years or 10 years, that number has steadily, even though we paid huge dollars for it when we bought it 15 years ago, or whatever the actual date was, we are still being required by DOT because of the eminent domain taking process. We're still paying on some of those people because they said you didn't pay them enough for this, or you didn't pay them enough for that. We're having to go back and true up those numbers. So it's a much longer, uncertain process in terms of what things cost.
Commissioner Adams?
I have a question for the city of Sebastian, and I don't know who the best person to answer this is, but I'll throw it out there, and maybe somebody can answer it. I'm familiar with the Fellsmere process, and when we went through that process, we did an annexation by ordinance, and we referenced in there our annexation agreement. I've read through the documentation that's been provided to us, and I haven't seen an annexation agreement. Do you guys have one?
Paul?
No, we don't have what's per se an annexation agreement, but our annexation has conditions on it, much like your agreement that reference our code requirements for donation of land, donation of institutional, stormwater, green space, conservation land. So we don't use the same formula that you all use, but the outcome is similar.
Does that speak to right-of-way donation?
Yes, it speaks to right-of-way donation as development occurs, much like your interlocal agreement does.
And does it speak to right-of-way donation on 82nd and 510?
It does not, because here's a problem with 82nd and 510. Trying to do, one, you have an eminent domain on 82nd Avenue, which we would then be drawn into that case if it happens to go to trial or it becomes a litigation issue. And then if we try to extract it on 510, our attorney has informed us there's not a nexus to require it. We've asked the landowner to donate it, and he's not willing to over this pond issue. If we try to force them to do it through the annexation agreement, the law court, the cases of law have all said there's no nexus for it because it's already been determined prior to the annexation that that road needed to be widened. If the annexation caused the widening, it would be different. But because over the last several years, the county has already determined that 510 needed to be widened, we could not make it a mandatory extraction.
That's all I have at this time.
Okay. Jason, do you have a comment?
I'd like to talk a little bit about the 82nd Avenue and the retention ponds. Staff had a brief conversation with the property owner last week about the retention ponds. The pond situation as proposed initially was a shared pond where you would have the retention ponds that serve for 82nd Avenue, but then as development happened, those ponds could be enlarged. And so if they build a Home Depot there, the pond would be enlarged, but the county, as the maintaining authority, would have responsibility for that entire pond. And we maintain our ponds at the county, but we may not maintain them at the same level of service that Home Depot might want to see. So and there's also mixing of the different stormwater. So there's some liability concerns that we had. We weren't agreeable to that. I did have a discussion with the property owner, and they were agreeable to having the developing property maintain the ponds. So we have that generally in concept, but we're working out the details. I will say that the take, as my understanding, has already occurred from DOT, so they already own the land. So if there's a change in the way the ponds would be shaped, that would seem like that's already been set. I would, if the valuation isn't an issue, I would hope the property owner would be able to make a commitment to the cash escrow that's been placed into the account by DOT for that. That would be a helpful thing to see.
Under that scenario that you mentioned where the ponds may have to be increased in size due to development takes place, who would be responsible for paying for the increase in size?
It'd be the developer, I would think.
Right, that would normally be the developer would make the pond larger. Our concern is the county doesn't want to take on responsibility for we're fine maintaining the drainage from the roadway, but we don't want to have any responsibility for drainage from like that Home Depot or a hotel or a Walmart, what have you.
And that's what we were told by the developer, that they would maintain the shared ponds.
Okay. Sir, back there?
Again, so just for a little bit of
I'm sorry, could you just
Oh,
state
I'm
your
sorry.
name and your position for the record, please?
No worries. Paul Carlisle, City Manager, City of Sebastian.
Thank you.
A little bit of clarification, it wasn't just the size of the pond or who maintains the pond, but also the location of the ponds. And they wanted to talk about where those, have some discussions on putting those ponds more integral to the property. So that was part of the conversation as well. And when he talked about the valuation, in speaking with our attorney, and I'm not an attorney, but Jason, you're not a planner and attorney, he was pretty clear that future land use maps do not affect value. When zoning and development orders come, that's when you have a right to develop. The future land use doesn't guarantee you anything. So, and again, when we spoke with the property owner, he says, my issue isn't about the money, it's about the ponds. And so I take him at his word of when we had a conversation in front of Councilmember Dodd. So think about that. Let's think about how we can work together to locate these ponds where it makes sense. The property owner's willing to work with it, and we can move this thing forward.
So, Paul, I would disagree with that one statement. The future land use is what gives the land the value, okay? Because zoning is a vested right. If you have different zoning levels on a land use, you can move up and down that zoning, and you have a vested right to do that. But once you upscale land use to say commercial, that adds tremendous value. Whether you develop it now or later, you take an ag land, so all you can do on that is ag, or maybe 1 unit per 5 acres. But if your land use changes to commercial industrial, it tremendously increases the value. So whatever your attorney said, that the future land use doesn't add value is totally incorrect.
Can I respond to that
Sure.
briefly? Again, you're talking about, you can do it when you have the zoning. You can't do anything on the land but what it's zoned for, even with a future land use. And the property appraiser doesn't assess a value for future land use. He only.
Property appraiser has nothing to do with it. It's
If
gonna
you're
be all
saying the
that,
value's there, then the property appraiser
it's gonna be
should
a
evaluate.
private appraiser that comes into this DOT hearing and says, it's now commercial, so we want $1 million an acre
Until
for
the
it.
zoning's in place.
Well, if you have a land use, isn't there zoning associated with it?
This is a future land use. It's not guaranteed until it goes before council for approval. It's
Which
nothing
is
to
coming
do
up on the
with
28th, right?
No, that's the future land use, that's not a zoning. That's future land use maps, that is not zoning.
Okay,
That doesn't
but-
grant
okay.
them the right to do anything but
Okay,
ag,
what is your commercial land use?
when the zoning comes in and the development order.
Okay, but aren't there various zonings available on that future land use?
Yes, it could be anything from multifamily to high industrial, so. there would
Okay,
be
so
no-
that's my point. That's my
You can't
point.
adjust the value until that zoning's put in place.
No. If it has a land use of ag only, okay, you can either run cows on it or put one house on it.
And that's all it
Regard-
has. And that's all it will have after the 28th. is
No,
ag
it'll
zoning.
have a commercial land use. The ag zoning may still be there, I get that, we do that too. The ag zoning may still be there, but the future land use is commercial, then it's a simple matter of change that zoning to industrial. And that's where the value is, Paul.
Once the zoning's in place, I agree.
Yeah, but you have once you change the land use, you have a vested right to whatever zonings are, that go along with that land use. So the value's there. That's
Jason?
I would just like to say county staff had a call with DOT right-of-way staff, and they said a pending annexation with the future land use could potentially increase the value, and the landowner would have the ability to make an argument that the value is increased based on that commercial and industrial. And I'd like to, just to tag on to Commissioner Adams' point about the annexation agreement. The city, it sounds like they're not going with an annexation agreement, and it's gonna go through whatever's in the comp plan or whatever, and I'm not a planner, so I apologize for my limited understanding, but as I understand it, and please, any of the planners, correct me if I'm wrong, when you're going through that, they have the full right of everything that's in the comp plan. You can't really make them do something less. If they agree to, you can. So one of the concerns I have is, when you look at the report, it shows there's 2 mile stretch of commercial and industrial development, which impacts the traffic, which County Road 510 really can't handle at this point. And the explanation for that is that, well, we don't have the mixed use zoning in the city of Sebastian, and so that's what it fits under, is commercial industrial. You could address that, I would think, in an annexation agreement that says there's gonna be mixed use development, there's not gonna be more than so much the report says 2.5 million square feet of industrial. And that seems like a lot for that area. If the intent is not to do 2.5 million square feet of industrial, you could put a limitation on that, and I say that not as an expert, but I can tell you that's what Fellsmere did. They put limitations on the Corrigans and FJV. There are also density limitations, that the density was, I think, less than 2 units per acre on one, and maybe 1.7, 1.6 units per acre on the other. What you're looking at here is 3.31, which is the maximum they could get. You could cover a lot of these things in an annexation agreement that says the density won't be more than this, there won't be more than X square feet of industrial, because the intent is to do mixed-use development. So I think an annexation agreement would be helpful in determining, rather than saying, well, we just believe the landowner is going to do something different than what it says on there. I think an annexation agreement or some mechanism to make sure that there is some kind of limitation to that, other than 2.5 million square feet of industrial, plus I think 1 million plus square feet of commercial is what's allowed there based on the backup for the city council meeting.
Mr. Resort.
Phil, can you go back to the slide where it had the right-of-way cost of $11 million from 58th Avenue to 82nd, I believe? So in that area, there's more than one, let's say, there's other than Graves Brothers owners in that strip. Is that correct or not? Because you have the development on the southwest corner that's a portion of that from 58th. I'm just trying to figure out how much of that is Graves and for what distance, and when was that number established? Has that number been out there for many, many years, or is that kind of the current today number based on the agreement they signed this past Friday?
I got this number from the project manager of the County Road 510 project, and it was based on, I believe a lot of the taking is gonna be on the north side of 510, so.
Okay, and how much, if you were to segment that 11.2 million, how much of it would be Graves Brothers and how much is it for the other, and do we know what distance that is? I'm trying to.
I can't do that.
Is it $3 million a mile for a 100-foot strip, or whatever the taking number is? I don't know what the actual taking depth is north of the current 510 right away. Because it seems, just for that small area, it just seems to be a pretty huge number without any other changes to it.
Rich America, Public Works Director in Indian River County. At this point in time, DOT has given us preliminary costs for right-of-way. They haven't broken it down in who owns what
Okay.
and linear footage cost for 510. They're still working on that. We're in the very beginning stages of right-of-way acquisition.
Okay.
The plans still need to be completed before they can even think about it. For any type of right-of-way acquisition, you need to know what you're building before you can go ahead
Right,
and find
know
it.
what you gotta take.
So they're just giving us preliminary estimates, just so we understand how much right away we believe is gonna have to be purchased. It will be, this number will move up or down depending on how the design shakes out.
Probably more up than down, I would. Let's hope for down. And then a second question for Susan, when, and maybe Mr. Tyson, when the Corgans did their annexation, they had their open space set aside, they had their density, but then they also had transportation-related items, the 26th Street flyover, which I believe is at their expense, including donating the right-of-way to it. So how was that negotiated into it? Apparently there's two completely different processes being
Why don't we
used.
have Mark Mathis, who's the city manager for the city of Felsman. He was the city community development director and really did the annexation agreement.
Along with Jason, and we see it as voluntary. That's the key thing, is voluntary.
Right.
Voluntary, it's all negotiation. I remember a story, and I was before my time when Felsman Farms annexed, where Jason told me that we pushed them so far they almost got it from the table and left. So our point is that's exactly what it is. So if you ask for a right-of-way donation and they choose not to get it, then you can say, sorry, we don't want you in our city.
Right.
So I'm not sure it necessarily has to fall into the same criteria as a taking from a development project, because it's a voluntary annexation. Both sides have to agree to the terms, or it doesn't have to happen. So that's what happened with all of our annexations, voluntary annexations. We push and push and push, and we get as much as we feel is appropriate. And we feel that major regional transportation facilities, we need to specifically call those out, because they are usually above and beyond the impact of that one development. So you need to specify that out. Whereas you can rely upon your land development code for some local roads and local right-of-ways, which obviously they have to donate to build because of their roads.
Right.
So we feel that requesting a right-of-way dedication has always been something that's appropriate for us to do an annexation.
And one of the things that we did with that was, okay, you know, you want a certain density, this is our list of what we want.
Right.
Or you want to be able to put a REACT district here, Regional Employment Activity Center, here. Okay, well, we want this much conservation land over here,
If I
or
could
whatever the case may
add
be.
one more thing too. Most all of our large annexations also have site-specific objectives and policies in our comprehensive plan. So we've taken it one step above and beyond annexation agreements and existing codes. When we think it's important, it's in our comp plan.
And it seems like, not that there's more than one way to do something, but the path that Fellsmere chose seems to have been a balance between the annexating party, landowner, and the city, and came up with a deal that worked for both sides. And there was still, I believe, still a significant compensation amount paid. I mean, if you're going to be building a bridge over I-95 and 26th Street, you're looking at a couple $1 million just for that undertaking alone that they were saddled with, but if they wanted to come in, that was a requirement, so.
And Joel might be able to speak to it, but our, at least with the FJB annexation, and even with the Corrigan, but FJB is the one that just sticks with me because it was a very onerous process to get there. The goal was to do something that was gonna benefit the property owner and the city. So how do we, as a property owner and a city, figure out the best thing for the both of us? We gave up a little bit, they gave up a lot more, but they were coming into the city, which is what they wanted to do. So we didn't go out and ask them to come in, they came to us, and these were our, this was our parameters in which we would do that for them.
County Attorney Reingold, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on something that Jason Brown brought up, and I think it piggybacks on something Commissioner O'Brien and Commissioner Adams were talking about. Just Rich Bergen, Public Works Director, was able to find an email from District Right-of-Way Manager Susan Day. So I just wanted to clarify this issue if possible. The quote in the email from FDOT was, "The appraiser would consider the likelihood of annexation and a change in zoning when assessing a property's value. A land use of commercial industrial would typically have a higher value than agricultural, and so it would seem that the annexation could increase the property's value, thereby increasing the project costs." So just kind of from the horse's mouth kind of issue.
Okay. So that gets back to the point of potentially doing like Fellsmere did, is coming up with this agreement between the parties. You give away this, you get this. Other comments from the members of the MPO or staff before I turn it over to the public? Mr. Solari.
I have just a couple general questions, and if I could, I'd ask them of the council member, because I haven't heard any discussions, Councilmember McFarland, about this in Sebastian. My fault, I didn't watch your show or anything like that. And only in the last days, when I think about communities and community development, have I been thinking about this. You know, so the first one that comes to mind is just more, you know, from a almost innocent bystander when you see it. You know, initially my thought was, you know, I'm really not too concerned what Sebastian does, but then when we got discussing more and more, I made me wonder when you saw the map, you know, why would the city of Sebastian want this type of annexation? You know, geographically, it doesn't seem to make particularly good sense. I don't see how it helps Sebastian itself, you know, develop in the type of community, you know, I thought it was developing in. So it's just, it's partially curiosity on my part. So the first question, and I have three, is, you know, is there any, what would be Sebastian's reasoning for the annexation?
Well, I would say you're looking at annexing a large portion like that. They're gonna be using the city services anyway, so if we have control over what they do, it works out better for us.
Okay, just,
I mean, no matter who, if they stay in the county, wherever they are, they're gonna be using the city of Sebastian's roads, streets, amenities, anything that goes on.
well, that doesn't really help me much, because any property along the border of Sebastian, the same argument would hold. So again, I mean, it just, that doesn't make sense to me, but that's fine.
Well, that is what happened with Vero Beach, in terms of the county, with the electric, and that's true, you do want to be aware of that.
And to
In
kind of
terms
add to
of
that,
county and city, city residents meeting county requirements.
kind of add to what Bob said, we do not have, we're not in a position land-wise to meet our comp plan, basically. So Sebastian is in a situation where we do not have, within the current city limits, the land that it takes for us to expand commercial space and other types of spaces. So when a landowner approaches us for voluntary annexation and it assists us in meeting our comp plan and it assists us in growing the city in areas that we don't have land to do, that's the reason it's attractive. That's one of the reasons it's attractive.
That's a more sensible reason, thank
Yeah.
you. And we talked about today, some people about the annexation agreement. Is there, I've known about Fellsmere's obviously for years, and that was a good, clear, evidently annexation agreement was let both parties know a lot of detail about how it was gonna develop into the future, but also let the rest of the county know. So I was just curious as to why Sebastian wouldn't have that type of clear and detailed annexation agreement going into the annexation, rather than letting the annexation occur and then fight things out later when you lose the leverage.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a real issue, and the reason I say that is I don't have any issue with doing an annexation agreement. It's one of those gray areas because I can't talk about what I would say if I was voting on this issue or not, but I think this is not I looked at the information that was done at Fellsmere and I looked at this. This is 1,100 acres. Fellsmere was, I think, the last one was 8,800 acres. And in some regards, it's not really an apples-to-apples comparison. I'm not saying that negative to Fellsmere because they did a great job putting together an annexation agreement about that. But I viewed it kind of differently because it's not. Now, if we were talking about annexing all the Grace property on 510, I would certainly expect and would want to see an annexation agreement that covers a piece of property that large. But we're not really talking about doing that. And so I didn't view it as an apples-to-apples comparison. Primarily for that reason. The reason for the land use, the future land use categories is because I believe that the council needs to at least see the categorizations that the owner is willing to accept within that, so we have some feel for what might happen within that. I wouldn't want to just annex 1,100 acres and say we're going to annex 1,100 acres of ag land and it's going to be a cow farm forever, because we know it's not. They wouldn't annex for that. So I need to see, well, I would personally need to see more than that, and that's the reason for the future land use designations on it, so.
Well, based on the conversation today, it just seems, at this point going forward, I would hope that the city of Sebastian might take into account some of the benefits from an agreement, including the 510 right-of-way, and maybe some other thoughts after some more conversation with maybe Mr. Brown. But I think it just seems to me that the annexation would probably work much better for Sebastian, actually. It would certainly work better for the idea of 510, and would probably put more of the county populace at ease if there was a clear picture of how it was going to develop and who's going to bear the burdens of it going forward. Just a
Did you have a third question?
clear for thought.
Did you have a third?
No,
The third.
the third one's
Oh,
assumed.
Okay, so Mr. Brown.
Yes, I just wanted to talk about some other concerns we have on the connection. So I'm going to pretend to be a transportation planner briefly, which I am not, but I stayed at the Holiday Inn Express last night, so this shows the annexation. I will say, last year there was a smaller annexation, I think about 70 acres, that was also Graves Brothers, the same owner, which has allowed this to be connected to the city. In that annexation, county staff sent our comments, we'd like you to see if you could get some right-of-way for County Road 510, because a lot of the right-of-way acquisition is actually on the north side of 510. And that didn't happen, so we were concerned about that. But one of the concerns is connectivity. I think they've done a good job of the internal roadway network of maintaining the half-mile grids. One thing that county staff was disappointed, we were under the impression that there's been a potential Laconia Street extension on the books, and I guess there's no plan to move forward with that at this time, is my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong. And I could guess that maybe that might not be popular with Laconia residents. I don't know if that's why that's not happening, but I think connectivity, because County Road 510 is this big thing that you gotta go around this corner, whether you wanna go north or south or east or west in this part of the county. So it's a unique area. Most of the county has a good grid system. As you look down here, there's roads every half mile, north-south, and grid roads every mile, east-west. And they are maintaining that. When you get up to Sebastian, the Sebastian Highlands area, that was a general development, so we all know how they built the roads. They like curlicues and all that stuff, and weren't that good on connectivity. So there's not much we can do about that. Our hope is that it wouldn't be made worse. So we think some interconnectivity here. 82nd lines up with Laconia Street. If you're going to have a large amount of development, it would seem to make sense to connect that, rather than have these folks from Sebastian Highlands, if they want to go there, they got to go down to Barber and then down to 66 and up 510. They got to go out to 512 and around 510 to get there. Doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. If you have connectivity, that improves. So that may not be popular, but I just want to tell you what happens in the county, because the city has, rightfully so, concerns about what happens outside its borders that might impact the city. I just want to mention that we also have 82nd Avenue, which we're continuing with, which would be impacted by this, and we've been planning 82nd Avenue for quite some time, but I don't know if the folks down south of there were quite expecting this much density going through there, because it was ag land. Also to the east here, you've got folks along 77th Street that is going to connect to the internal roadway, 73rd Street, 69th Street. Those folks are on 5 and 10 acre ranchettes that basically dead ends into orange groves and ag land. If that becomes the way that people are cutting through to get to Target or Walmart, I think those folks have a concern. So whereas a Laconia extension might not be popular in the neighborhood, I think the folks along 73rd, 69th, 77th, 82nd Avenue to the south might have some concerns of a similar nature. And that's one of the reasons that just the shape of this, you got the city of Sebastian here, and then it just juts out, and the access to that goes through a lot of other places, creates problems on 510. We'd like to see more interconnectivity to help address that.
And as a transportation planner, B+. Good job.
All right. Get my honorary planner ribbon at the end of this.
Any other comments from staff members before I open up the public? Yes,
So
sir.
one other thing is we have talked to them and an adjoining property owner about interconnectivity through there into the city of Sebastian. We're not so sure that Laconia is the right place at this time until development goes through to punch that road through that land, because there's some environmental lands that we need to look at. There's other lands there that we know and other connected roads that we can connect to another person that is in the city that wants to consider maybe improving their development. There's actually two parcels that are expanding that are within the city limits now that will help create some of that interconnectivity, whether Graves Brothers does or not. So those are things that we're looking at. We're not saying not to interconnect, that's our plan. And we know as it develops, the residents will also push for other interconnectivities other than ones that we're suggesting for the property owners. So we are looking at that as well.
Yes, sir.
I'll just add that the city of Fellsmere uses annexation agreements on any annexation. We've got annexation agreements on annexations of 40 acres, 90 acres, so I don't think the size is really what controls. It's really just memorializing what they're doing and what you're doing, and so that we all know about it.
Any comments from the public? Okay.
Nobody?
We're waiting for you, Andrew.
Okay, so where do we move from here? Does somebody want to make it?
I think
Okay.
Andrea has a comment.
All right, go ahead, please. Could you state your name for the record, please?
Sure, Adrian Coy, City of Sebastian. Laconia, if I remember right, was here at MPO 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I was on MPO. Bill?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had Laconia on the radar to punch it through, and we were stuck, it couldn't go because of environmental issues. That's a no-go, if I remember right.
No, I don't remember we ever did a PD&E study on it, which would be the next step. That would be one that would debunk all the environmental issues. It's definitely not going to be an easy job, but, you know, it's essential. You really need connectivity. I mean, I think Mr. Brown put it very well. You know, in Sebastian, we've had a history of taking projects off of the long-range plan, and given a growing town, it's a large and dynamic town, you kind of can't do that continuously and expect to have a quality level of service and flow. You know, from Barber Street at 66th and Schumann Drive, Fleming Street extensions. The long-range plan had quite a few different projects on it. So.
Yeah, I just know we stopped talking about it because it wasn't going to happen. So that was here at MBO. Might be able to go back on, and that's not why I really stood up. Anyway, I guess you're not going to speak for IRNA. The IRNA, just for your information, I have a letter. They are supporting the city of Sebastian, just like the city of Fellsmere sent a letter of support to go ahead with the annexation. However, not unopposed to doing an agreement and ironing out although I've read your paperwork in Sebastian, it's pretty specific, but I think to make everybody feel better, that maybe there's another agreement that can be ironed out quickly to solve these problems. This is not a difficult thing, and I don't think that the county should be really opposed to this either, because, I mean, geez, Liberty and all these other annexations that the county has done, I mean, it wasn't difficult. And nobody came and asked the city of Sebastian for permission. This is, I agree this needs to be done, but it doesn't have to take a lot of time. And I think you'll see most people are supporting it.
Other comments from the public? Yes, sir. You stand up and state your name for record,
My
please.
name's Bob Yulovich, representing Corrigan Ranch. May I go up there and
Sure.
do like Jason and pretend? I slept in my house in Palm City, so.
Money, Bob.
I'm not representing Sebastian River Improvement District at this moment, but for 14 years I was the administrator and helped write most of the documents governing. So just for general information, there's a lot of people sitting around the table, but I didn't see any representation from Sebastian River Improvement District. The rights-of-ways in Sebastian River Improvement District that most people call 82nd Avenue are owned by Sebastian River Improvement District. The landowner has on record now a contract with with St. John's River Water Management District for a water farm that's going to consume 25 plus or minus acres of public land. Okay, so those are all involved in it. So when everybody talks about agricultural land and all that, there's a proposed water farm in there. It's also important to note that the lateral D berm that's associated with that is not recognized from FEMA, so this is a 100-year floodplain currently as defined. I'm just laying this all out. I think you need to bring Sebastian River Improvement District to the table with the clear understanding that presently they're in negotiations with FDOT for purchasing a sliver of land for 82nd Avenue improvement, of which the membership of this Board of Supervisors of Sebastian River Improvement District is also the landowner, one of the members. So that all needs to be taken into consideration when you're talking about the value of annexation, putting a value on that. Ponds, when you talk about siting a pond, when you have a 180-acre water farm there. So I think that's important. I didn't hear any reference to that. I think that's critical to your decision-making process.
Is a 180-acre water farm currently on public property, or will it?
25 acres of the water farm is public property, as owned by Sebastian. The other thing, to the dismay of the road planners, is all of the Sebastian River Improvement District canals are not aligned with the roadway system. They're off. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Paul from Fayette Clean Water Coalition. Isn't there supposed to be another piece of property north of 510 that was included in one of the drawings that I had seen, like 78 acres that was mentioned earlier?
No.
I think he's talking about the annexation from last year. It's there, but you can't see it that well.
Yeah, grayed out would be the city.
There's another map that shows it better. That red one.
That red one right there.
Yeah.
So you're saying that's already been annexed into the city?
Last year.
Okay.
North of 510.
Yeah.
This is 510 here.
So it's the red one north of there, Phil.
So you're saying it's this one?
That's
correct.
So I have a question if there's not other questions. Because Bob brought up a good point about the Sebastian River Improvement District. So the Sebastian River Improvement District was a water control district that converted to an improvement district. And improvement districts by law, by statute, have certain rights that they can do. This particular improvement district has all of those rights, which is basically all the same rights as a municipality has except for zoning changes. So they can build roads, they can put up lights, they can put in utilities, they can put in schools, they can have police and fire and all that kind of stuff. and they can levy taxes or assessments to fund those things. How is that, and there are people within that improvement district that will be county residents, and once the annexation goes through, then there'll be people that will be city residents as well. So how does that governmental entity interwork with the city? Have you guys discussed that? Because technically, they could just go out and levy an assessment and put up streetlights if the city of Sebastian did not want to do that.
Good point, I hadn't addressed that, but, and that's why I just brought that up. I've done that in the past, when Acme Improvement District was an special improvement district, and Wellington became a dependent district of the city. This would be an odd one to do that with, because their boundaries lie inside and outside of the city, so, interesting question.
Let me, if I may, Mr. Chair, let me add on to them. 2 years I'll have a 50-year relationship with the flood control district, so I'm very familiar with the Acme Improvement District as a foundation for Wellington. But what Susan's saying is, Sebastian River Improvement District by law is a chapter 189.
No, it's 297 now, 298 district is improvement.
Sebastian River Improvement District is a chapter 189 as signed by the governor in June of 2007. I helped write the legislation for that from a 298. So as Susan said, as it's 189 special improvement district, it has all of the above capabilities to do that, including getting into CBDs and other matters. So that's why I brought it up. A lot of people are talking, but one of the primary players that should be involved in this discussion should be the Sebastian River Improvement District, because basically you're taking a big chunk of that into, or requesting a big chunk of that be annexed into the city of Sebastian. And you may be disconnecting a whole flood control system associated with that improvement district, or you may not be, but that needs to be understood.
And just to follow up on that, my concern would be that you're dividing the improvement district in a way in which there might be an expectation that the city or the county might need to provide certain services that the city or the county might not be in a position to provide at the time in which the improvement district would like those provided for development purposes. They have the ability to levy an assessment. So my concern would be that they might possibly utilize that ability to levy an assessment onto residents within the county, because they also fall within the improvement district. And how do we work that out? So I would like to, that is a concern of mine, just knowing how improvement districts work. And then just to follow up on a comment that was made earlier about zoning, when the city of Fellsmere did their annexation, their first annexation east of I-95, the city of Sebastian had many concerns about the growth of the city and how that would impact the city of Sebastian's infrastructure. I think boat ramps was actually, Andrea, you remember, boat ramps was a big thing, and other things as well. I just remember the boat ramps. But as that happened, the city of Sebastian and the city of Fellsmere were involved in a lawsuit, which is fine. I mean, that it worked out, but there's a stipulated settlement agreement, and one of the things in that settlement agreement speaks to the fact that the city of Sebastian was very uncomfortable that the city of Fellsmere did not have an ag zoning designation. So when the FJB property would come into the city of Fellsmere, the concern was they would have to fall in one of our residential zoning categories, because we did not have a catch-all category for ag. The settlement agreement required us to create an ag zoning designation to park that property, so it gave it just gave a little bit more comfort to the city of Sebastian that we and the property owner intended to do what we said we were going to do. And it took away that trust me, trust us, we're gonna do it right kind of situation. So that might be something you guys wanna look at. And then the last thing I'll say is, I don't think anybody here is trying to tell the city of Sebastian that they cannot annex. We don't even have the ability to do that. You guys, the city of Sebastian is autonomous, they have home rule, it can do whatever they would like to do. And I understand because the conversations have been going on for years about the lack of commercial and industrial space within the city. So I understand what you're trying to do as a city. My concern, and I think the rest of the concern from the community and the people that are living around this annexation, because I've had phone calls from people within the 5 and 10 acre ranchettes, as well as Vera Lake Estates and some other areas that are gonna surround this annexation, is that it's not very clear, it seems very quick, and there's a lot of questions. So I think what everybody's kind of asking is not to not do it by any stretch of the imagination, or even dictate to you how it's particularly done. But we would like to have a few more conversations and just make sure everybody understands what is going on. So then when, you know, I have to go back and tell the Vera Lake Estates property owners, I'm giving them accurate information, and they have supported what you guys are doing, because I can tell you very clearly from going through an FJB annexation versus a Corrigan annexation, it is way easier to do it if everybody is helping and collaborating and supporting and behind you than it is if the community is up in arms and scared because of all the misinformation. So that's, and Andrea would probably.
This gentleman has a comment. Could you identify yourself for the record?
Yes, thank you for recognizing me. Damian Gilliams, President of Sebastian Property Owners. You can be reached at sebastianpropertyowners.com. After Mrs. Adams, you did a great job in explaining that. And our community has not been really put on notice, where they came to all the different subdivisions and told exactly what they're going to do. They left a lot of things out. The fact that we don't have a city engineer on staff to negotiate what's in the best interest of the community. There is now a petition that's circulating through the community in excess of 300 to 500 people, and the word's just getting out. This thing is being rushed through, and it's done through the summer months when most of the northern residents are not here, and they don't have a chance to weigh in on it. There's a lot of good things that the county commissioners, Bob Saloy, that brought up, and Mr. Zork brought up, and staff has brought up here. This is going way too fast. There needs to be an annexation agreement. We don't have that. And without having somebody in our side of the table, to sit at the table to represent the community, we're going to not going to get that opportunity later on when it's already done. And the fact that they're looking to just meet their comp plan and not looking out for, like she mentioned, the boat ramps down there, it's going to be a big impact. They need to consider that part of their recreation purchase, putting property aside for these 3,500 new homes that are coming into the area. So I think the whole thing needs to be slowed down. We need to have professional engineers, because the city doesn't have an engineer, and this needs to be looked at in detail, from an environmental standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a police and safety standpoint. It's just being rushed through. And so the property owners could ask me to come down here and ask that this thing be tabled as quickly as possible so that they have a chance to weigh in. Thank you very much.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I would like to clarify the IRNA's position, because I have a copy of their letter. They start off with, they have a lot of concerns about the land use, water use, environment, and growth perspectives. They do state that we're not against the annexation. However, our position is to work with the principal to get a mutual agreement going forward. And they recommend some type of interlocal agreement. And then it is summarized that this process has moved too quickly. We need to spend more time working together to come to a resolution with which everyone concerned is comfortable. So I wouldn't categorize as them giving this the blessing. I think they still have a lot of concerns, and they too would like to see this slowed down and get more detail and work out some type of either annexation agreement or interlocal agreement.
You meant the Any River Neighborhood Association?
That's from the IRNA. Yes.
Bob, could I follow up on that?
Sure.
Back when we first annexed the Anson property, was back in the early, or I guess mid-90s, yeah, okay.
Joel, was that back in the first Indian War?
That's right. Well, we're going way back, but anyhow, and that was before the IRNA formed. We annexed the Anson property. There was 8,247 acres out there off of, it was on the south side of County Road 512 and west of I-95. And that went through, we did our comp plan, they paid for the comp plan for us, and everything went very well. Well, then when we started working on the JVC, the joint venture, FJV, the 18,000 acres, then that's when the neighborhood association came live, and it just got completely out of hand. They came out, they were talking to our property owners about gridlock. We're gonna have gridlock on 512, you wouldn't be able to get in and out. All those people that lived in Fellsmere were gonna go out there and crowd their beaches. They wouldn't be able to get to the beach because of all of us. There were 5 million houses gonna spring up overnight. It just went on and on and on, even to the point where they said that we were gonna build ocean view condominiums in Fellsmere. It got absolutely ridiculous.
Empire State Building.
Well, the question was asked, how tall would it have to be for you to see the ocean? Anyhow, it was just absolutely ridiculous. But then out of that came the call for charter government. And they wanted to have charter government so that any annexation would have to go to a referendum. It would have to, and at that time, by that time, I think it was probably about 500,000 or something like that. They had gotten all the little property owner associations, like the Fellsmere community, our Fellsmere property owners, the Sebastian property owners, a conglomerate of all the little property owner associations in the county, and they were probably 6,000 strong at that time. Had the charter government gone through, the IRNA would have controlled the future of the county. They had what we call a moat mentality. We're here, pull the drawbridge, don't let anybody else in. It's all right to have domestic help as long as they live in another county and they commute back and forth. We don't want them living next to us. It got absolutely ridiculous. But, and then let's see, I heard one morning on the Bob Sue show that we were talking about an annexation, and they called it another Jason Nunemaker land grab. And I called Bob and I said, that's ridiculous, because we do not grab land. The property owners come to us and ask us, because the county won't change the zoning laws from agriculture to either commercial, residential, or industrial, and we will do that. So that's why we annexed, and we went from, during that period of time, we were 100 years 1 square mile, and now we're better than 57 square miles. We got lots of room to grow. But the really good thing that came out of there that brought the IRNA around, where they just got to the point where they just couldn't get enough of Jason, he was their guest speaker and all this, was the green spaces that we provided out there. We didn't, it wasn't all industrial, it wasn't all, and of course those 5 million houses never did materialize because the crash came. So that's just a little bit of the background, and Sebastian, you're very fortunate that those people have not gotten involved to stop what they're doing, because it just went on and on and on, and there was no end to it. So
It's a new IRNA.
okay.
That was a pretty good history of it, though. You
Well,
covered it pretty well.
Well, that comes from being old, so that's it, Bob. I just wanted to get that.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Donna Haller, and I'm a resident of Sebastian.
Okay.
And I want to just say that we do have an 8-page letter of opposition that I certainly will give to you if you wanted to read it. It has been sent to the city of Sebastian, has been signed.
We'll
by-
take it for the record.
Yes, please do. Many of the concerns are listed, as well as own personal concerns about conservation and environment, those kind of things. And I live right off of Laconia, so I certainly can understand how that may be an issue at some point. But also, it certainly fits into the new category of a new town, when you read all of the paperwork about it. And I believe, my understanding is it's only 400 feet wide where they're going to be annexing it into the part of Sebastian, and I hope that's taken into consideration. I also feel that it has been rushed. I have really have just been brought up to snuff on this less than 2 months ago. The meetings that I have attended have been harsh. I don't think that the city of Sebastian has been very gracious about listening to the concerns of the citizens. I think there'll be more people coming forward at the next meetings, and I think they do need to sit back and listen to what people, what their concerns are. Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Beth Mitchell, and I'm a resident in the city of Sebastian, and I have no comment on the actual subject matter today. I want to compliment all of our leaders in the room for having this discussion. I know, Mr. Dodd, that you felt that there were some limitations, but in today's age, to actually have everybody that is a party to this in the room and talking about it is something that I'm very grateful for. I would hope that some of the other topics that the county has raised will also be addressed, if not today, I know it's getting late, but at a different time. And I think that this is the perfect opportunity and venue to have these conversations. So thank you all for participating.
Anyone else from the public? Mrs.
I take the opportunity as chairman of the Board of County Commissioners of any other county to invite the Sebastian City Council members who are here today, and any others, if you can get word to them, to tomorrow's BCC meeting, which begins at 9 o'clock, because this issue will be discussed some tomorrow. Is that correct, Jason? So I don't want to blindside you, and we'd be happy to have you come and happy to have you be part of the conversation tomorrow.
Unlike you, Bob, I watch your meetings on the tape.
Fast forward button.
Ms. Moss?
Does not have to do with this annexation, but the city of Vero Beach is also looking at an annexation. I had a conversation with Mr. Madsen before the meeting. It does involve traffic, it does involve A1A. So my question is, if we have a situation like this where it involves a roadway that we have spent significant time on, this group, MPO, should it be on the agenda as just, should that be our routine? Yes.
Can I, in my opinion, that doesn't affect MPO priorities directly. We don't really have a plan to widen A1A. So that's where I would draw the line between something that might be appropriate for the MPO, although the MPO can discuss whatever it would like.
You know, may I say one more thing on that? You know how it's related? You may recall those turning lanes, A1A, and each of the bridges, they're going to be lengthened. I don't remember. What's the time frame on that, if you recall?
Dan? We have the construction manager of the operations center in Fort Pierce here. I think it's within a year. I think the design anyway will be done soon. We'll get back to you on it. I don't know the exact time.
All right, well, I mean, that's the kind of thing that would have been, I asked because it's relevant to this specific annexation request, and for the community, this is voluntary. It involves property that the border, the city border, it's actually in the River Shores. It's directly north of us, and this is the property that is currently owned by Florida Institute of Technology. It's right behind that CVS there. So that, what they're talking about is future development.
For something like that, I would recommend you get with me directly, and I'll get with the appropriate DOT people who do review the impact of traffic development on the state system, and see if you get satisfaction that way, if they can look at the traffic study and validate it for you or whatever prior to coming to the MPO, just because of its scale and that it doesn't affect the priority, if that's everyone's pleasure. Okay.
Yes, it is. All right, then I will forward that to you.
Sounds good.
Any other comments by MPO members? Is there any motions want to be made, or any
Well, I
other
think this
issues?
wasn't set up for a vote, it's just more discussion.
Right, I understand.
Understanding, but I would just like to put out there that I would like to see the city table this and cancel the August 28th second reading on this. I think that there's still a lot of things to be worked out. And I think from the city's point of view, as Commissioner Adams has mentioned, you know, you guys are kind of in the driver's seat here. They're coming to you wanting to get into the city. So this is the one chance you have to get everything right. And then once they're in and you vote for the land uses and things like that, it's pretty well locked in. You can't go back and take it away again. So I would really hope that you all would just go ahead and table that for now, put the brakes on this, and let's have more meetings and discussions on this and get everybody's buy-in on this you know, the one concern I had just looking at the site plan, I understand that y'all want more space to maybe have employment centers and things like that. I think that's great. Everybody would love that. But having all the commercial stuff along 82nd Avenue here, to me, that just screams strip malls going down the road. And that's really not good economic activity. You know, you might get a new Dunkin', instead of Dunkin' Donuts, and a Tire Kingdom, and an auto parts store. But I don't think that's the type of economic development or the type of job centers you really all are looking for. But when you change that land use to commercial now, all along that whole strip of 82nd Avenue, then they can come in and say, well, I don't care what zoning, you know, we get to pick one because we have the land use that says commercial, and it could just be retail, and you're gonna have a long strip of retail there, and I don't think that's really the kind of job creation you guys, I mean, obviously you're gonna need some retail, but just how I look at that, man, that whole thing is just gonna be US 1 again. I mean, seriously. So I would really ask you all to consider tabling this, and we can have more meetings, let staff work on it. I think more MPO meetings dedicated to this and things like that, but it really seems rushed, and there's no reason to rush it. You guys and gals and Sebastian there, you all are in the driver's seat here. You can dictate the terms. You know, as Commissioner Adams and Mark have said, this is where you push hard on them, and you should be pushing hard on them, and not just saying, oh yeah, whatever you want, you dictate it. And then, like, looking at the stormwater ponds, they're, according to the scale here, they start 400 feet off the road and go back another close to 400 feet. So, you know, usually when we do a right-of-way, we don't let, you know, if we're buying a piece of land for right-of-way, that person doesn't tell us how we're gonna build the pond and what to do with it. I mean, we're paying a premium price for it, and we build the pond how we need it to be built. There's gotta be an added cost to push these things back 400 to 800 feet off the road. Who's gonna pay for that? Anybody? Has that been worked out? Who's gonna pay that added cost to move these ponds 400 feet off the road? Okay, I mean, so it's details like that y'all need to sit down and work these things out instead of just trying to rush this through. So that's my request. It's not a motion, but it's a request that the city table this and not move on it until we have all gotten together and agreed upon. And we're not even talking about some of the other issues we have, like the utilities and things like that. So there's a lot more work to be done here, and there's no reason to try to rush it through in 2 weeks. So.
Yeah.
Any other remarks by MPO members? Okay, hearing none, I'll close this item. Move on to item number 5, other business. Do any of the members have other business? Okay, hearing none, move to item number 6, comments from the public other than the item we just discussed.
Very happy.
Okay, hearing none, move to adjourn.
Thank you all very much, and we'll see you in September.
Congratulations.